Cedering, Star, Jonathan, I'm glad that we could have a chance to talk about jazz re-evolution from WORDTheatre. And before we get started on the specifics of this particular show, I want to ask you about something that Louis Armstrong is quoted as having said. He said, if you have to ask what jazz is, you'll never know. And he's probably right. But in 2023, if someone were to ask each of you what jazz is, what would your response be?
Star, we just talked about that this morning. I think you nailed it.
Well, we were talking, to me, jazz represents freedom because in classical music, if you play the wrong note, you're making a mistake, other than if you're playing a cadenza, right? And even some cadenzas are learned. But in jazz, if you play a note that's not necessarily the right note, you can kind of take it anywhere. And so to me, it's almost a metaphor for life and the ability to pivot, and so jazz and improvisation music as a whole, to me, is a metaphor for following your life's path and not necessarily being adhering to any strict order.
Jonathan or Cedering, do you want to add to that or have your own take?
Jonathan's yeah. Go ahead.
Just to me, first of all, I hate defining things. And they're different. It's like, it's almost the same as, do I want to listen to this composer or that composer, or this jazz artist or that jazz artist, or the Who's Tommy? It's whatever. And I enjoy them all, basically. So it's hard for me to say what jazz is at this point, because it's gone through so much transformation. What it was isn't what it is. And there isn't an it, there are its. There are different defining this way of playing, that way of playing. That's my incoherent answer.
I'll start by saying that everything that I choose to explore at WORDTheatre is really, I'm interested in investigating the deepest parts of people's humanity. And this is actually my third jazz show. And I think that what's so phenomenal about sharing these stories that come from these human beings who have triumphed so exquisitely over the most difficult conditions, poverty, parents are prostitutes, people are abandoned, drug addiction, economic hardship, racism, the biggest obstacles have been thrown in the path of so many of the people that we consider jazz luminaries. And the triumph of the human spirit over adversity is a source of endless fascination for me. And it makes me weep. It makes me weep, and it makes me want to celebrate. And the two people I have here, we've collaborated on many shows, and it's, they're very different. The last show we did was the history of the cosmos, but all the people who look up at the sky and have tried to, make sense of it. It's the human spirit, this longing for connection and greatness, and this idea of freedom. I think they all have that in there, because by connecting with other human beings, I throw the ball to you, you throw the ball back to me. We're moving, we're alive, we're connecting, we're sharing what it is to be human. I think that's what all of the shows that we've ever tackled at WORDTheatre historically, and with these two collaborators specifically, have been very much about that. And the freedom is such a huge aspect, because you can never be imprisoned if you have one, human thought for striving and connect and get to connect with anybody, you are free. You are free. No one can take that away from you. And that's to me, I think, why I've come back to jazz and want to keep people, letting people know. Antonique Smith, who was singing, was saying that for her, like listening to Bessie Smith, she realizes everything she's doing, everything Whitney Houston, like they've all come through this historical journey, and we all stand on the shoulders of these icons, and to know your history is to be free to create moving forward. And that's why the idea of jazz re-evolution, it's just human spirit evolving, making magic, and then we bring the words into it. And the words of some of these, these jazz cats are pretty inspiring. So
well, so let me ask you about that, because I know you did the first jazz show I think you did was And All That Jazz in London in 2015.
Yeah.
Obviously, WORDTheatre has grown. You've learned new ways of telling stories, new ways of getting the message across that you want to get across in a given show. How has your approach to the combination of jazz and text evolved over those 8 years? How is this show going to be different than what you have done before?
Well, my relationship to music with literature actually started when I met my husband 13 years ago. He's been in the music business his whole life, and he's at CAA. He took me to a Nicki Minaj concert at the Staples Center. And I've been dealing with probably some of the most famous living writers of literature. Short stories in particular is my specialty. Everybody from Hilary Mantel in London to Richard Bausch and T.C. Boyle, Joyce Carol Oates in the States, right? So it's a little bit of a rarefied world, people who want to come hear a great actor bring a short story to life. It's like, I'm going to go listen to an actor read a short story. Oh, that sounds thrilling. Versus I'm going to go hear Nicki Minaj with my 20,000 friends. So I'm sitting at this concert and I thought, how do I get these people to be hearing great writing? And I said music and dance. And that's when I did my first show at the Ford in 2012. John Edgar Wideman, who's a very important African-American writer, he started publishing the year Langston Hughes died and was the first African-American writer to, he was the second African-American Rhodes Scholar after Alain Locke. And I think it took another 57 years for him to be sent to Oxford to play basketball. And he's been publishing. He's one of the most prolific, brilliant writers. So I had 30 actors on stage. We had hip hop dancers. We sold out, and people are still talking about that show. So I realized that the combination of music and word opens it up to a whole different audience. And you don't have to, our shows are not highfalutin. You don't have to be an intellectual to come to WORDTheatre. I always say you could be the plumber or the president. A great story, well told, will excite you. And so it's just been continually evolving. In fact, Star's daughter is a violinist, and she just did a solo piece to open a literary event with a great writer we had in town. And you could just feel the energy. First of all, you feel everyone relax. They're in great hands, great musicians. They're just like, oh, I understand this language. And then you start bringing words into the deal, and oh, it's a great story. I don't have to, sit there and try to figure out what this guy or woman is saying. So does that answer your question? It's been a beautiful, consistent evolution. And then when these two, well, actually, Jonathan and I first worked together when KCRW hired me to do a series of Isak Dinesen stories. And I knew we needed some beautiful, moody music. And I just happened to be listening to KCRW. And they said, oh, the Young Composer series at LACMA, Jonathan Sachs. And my friend had just worked with him. And so we've been working together ever since. But this combination of words and music, I feel music is a language that everybody can understand, and literature can be intimidating. And my whole objective is to make literature accessible. So that's why we're busing, we've got tickets for students from South Central, and we've always had lots of students in our performances. We go into schools. This whole show is a benefit for WORDTheatre Campus, which is our schools program, and it's also a new website that we're building. And so I do think just that that element has been an alchemical dynamic door that opens literature for more people.
Well, Jonathan, you and Star both have the responsibilities of making the music work with the literature. From your perspective, what does the combination of literature and the work that you're doing allow for an audience to understand, who these people were, what this text was, and what the importance of it was?
Well, the important thing to me is you can talk about Charlie Parker or Thelonious Monk, but what do they sound like? What do they feel like? Words will give you a sense of that to a certain extent, but it's not the same as just hearing it. For me, the hearing is what's most important. And so in a show like this, it's good to put musical color in, so it comes alive, I believe. Star, help me.
Star, can you hear?
Yeah.
Yeah, Jonathan's asking you to weigh in on that, and that
Oh, I didn't.
very intelligent, daunting question.
You know what? Just when he asked me to weigh in, I didn't hear him say that because I think the Zoom was kind of going south, and so his words were like, whoa. But Jonathan, I totally agree with what you're saying. I mean, it's one thing to talk about music, and it's another thing to hear it, and it's like seeing a film with no score. Nobody really understands that the score is there. Sometimes it's creating a mood in a way that they can't even define sometimes. But why are you crying? It's great acting, but why are you crying at just looking at a beautiful scene, a vista? But there's some, out of Africa, there's some beautiful John Barry music, or there's some beautiful Ennio Morricone music, or, John Powell. I mean, there's just wonderful Hildur Gudnadottir, just some beautiful music that is amplifying and uplifting the human spirit. And so, it's amazing that the script that Cedaring's put together for this show is just so insightful and beautiful. And it was so funny. I was just talking right before we got on with the sax player that's going to be playing with us, and talking to him about, how we'd like for him to do a Charlie Parker solo and kind of improvisation under some of the actors speaking. And he was so excited about that. And I read him the poem that they were talking about, and he's like, oh, okay, I think I have like 10 things in mind. I want to run them all by you. And I thought, here's what's so beautiful. Musicians care about music, and they care about people. And this is a gift that we're sharing with the world, as music creators, musicians, orchestrators, everything. This is something that it's like when you're given a gift to be able to create this language and understand this language, then you're also given the realization that this language can help the world. It can help, and so what Jonathan is saying, I think that writers put their hearts into the words, musicians put their hearts into the music, and together it's so strong, and it's so clear and cohesive, and so moving to have them both married to each other.
So I guess that begs the question, given that we're in 2023, I mean, if you want to hear, a Coltrane solo, you can go to Spotify, Apple Music, you could go any number of places to just listen to that. So is it important to present the music as it was originally performed, or to give it a more, accessible way by putting a contemporary spin on it?
Well, I've been talking to the singers about that, because we are doing Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith, and I believe, we're not piping in recordings of Bessie Smith into the auditorium. What we're doing is, I believe that when the actors step into these characters, they are the vessel, but we are not doing straight imitations. We are doing, we have this unique one night only combination of 26 people on the stage who are all bringing their game to it. And they're bringing their life experiences. They've all been attracted to the material because it is, as Glenn said, thank you for inviting me to be part of such a daunting evening, in all caps, right? And I was so excited. That was one of my first readers of the script, to get that, because they've had these life experiences, and what makes it is it's such a whole greater than the sum of its parts. So to do a, Ma Rainey, we're not going to do that. That would sound kind of creepy. And when Antonique is out there belting her, Bessie Smith out there, it's like, wow. And it's going to send people back to do the research. By the way, Craig, I am definitely tricking everybody into learning a lot about the history of jazz and about racism. I uncovered stories that I had no idea how Central Avenue got shut down, or how Marilyn Monroe helped Ella Fitzgerald. And these stories are like, they just, to know them, and then to be exposed to this crazy Buddy Bolden back, and just like, damn, look at all these cool people, picking this stuff up and taking it to the next level.
Well, and the next level is constantly being redefined. You have Terrace Martin on the program, who has one foot in jazz and one foot in the hip hop world, and it seems more and more those two worlds are intersecting more than they used to. I know that the Blue Note Jazz Festival in Napa is getting a lot of criticism because it has artists like Nas and Chance the Rapper on it, and it leans more towards the hip hop rap world than it does the jazz world. I'm wondering what your views are on where jazz is going, and whether this blend of genres is going to create something that is beneficial for those who believe jazz should be jazz and hip hop should be hip hop.
Okay, well, I also loved Jonathan's original response, not being defined. I think music, well, I'm a words person, but I think that the influence, it's know your history. I mean, all the influences evolution is beautiful, and serious musicians are going to keep evolving and adapting all sorts of things. And I think that being a purist is very reductive. I don't want to be put in a box with the kinds of shows that I do. So I say go for it, everybody. As long as there's that incredible musical collaboration by people who really play. These people, like reading about Thelonious Monk and realizing he played 12 hours a day to get these discordant sounds going. This is the start. Over to you.
Oh, no, well, I was just going to say that just speaking, to what you're saying, Craig, that was really interesting that the Grammys this year just added a new category called alternative jazz, because they wanted to have, at least from my understanding, they wanted to have a place for jazz that is, that doesn't necessarily fit in. And they also have kind of like a progressive, I don't know what the actual name of it is, but it's in the more hip hop category, but it also, encompasses people like Thundercat and Kamasi Washington. And, so I think the Academy is starting to kind of realize that, when you put apples and oranges in the same thing, when you need a place for people who are playing pure jazz, and you need a place for people who are experimenting with melding things, and it feels to me like it feels like the whole society in a way is melding. Film music is going on tour and playing, to big audiences, and with orchestras and different kinds of soloists than you would normally hear in a classical concert. And classical concerts are starting to bring in, film composers and other kinds of music. So I think it's really, really interesting and important, to, as long as you respect and I guess if you are respecting where something came from, then I think it's amazing to explore every possibility about it.
Well, and if I may insert before if you want to respond, Jonathan, but I also feel like the blending of these two things hopefully encourages people who thought that they were only hip hop fans. It would encourage them to go listen to the jazz and vice versa.
Exactly.
So true. So true.
Jonathan, did you want to say anything about that?
Well, it might encourage me to start listening to hip hop.
Yeah, I think for me, it's very much true. The last big, when we did the last big show at the Ford, there was everything from classical music that these two composed that was so out of this world, to Darren Criss singing Space Oddity, and Starr managed to get a guitar player who had toured with Bowie for 2 years, and so this, and then we had, what do you call those, pan drums that ended up the hand pan and timpani drums, and it went from the Greeks to Rocket Man, it was, and so there was something for everybody. And I think that you can't leave there and go, oh, I don't like classical music, oh, I don't like that jazz riff that Amy Keys was singing, or whatever. It's just like, it's a story. It's the big story of the cosmos. And now this is the big story of the history of jazz that, we leave off with Wayne Shorter. May he rest in peace. But his words, I just got lost in his interviews, the way he thinks, the freedom really is an underlying thing. Triumph over racism, injustice, poverty, all that. It's, yeah.
Well, you bring up Wayne Shorter, and Wayne Shorter is one of the last of a dying breed of jazz legends from what we properly define as jazz. So if we fast forward 100 years, and let's say WORDTheatre is still around, and we're going to be looking back to what jazz was in the 2020s, what are your hopes for where jazz will be, and where thought will be as it relates to the same issues that are all being addressed in this show?
Well, that's a really challenging question at a moment like this, when the world seems to be going backwards as totalitarian dictators are taking over. And ever since we had a Black president, racism seems to be, anti-Semitism, racism, all seems to be on the rise. And you would think that, when they had Central Avenue thriving as an actually integrated place in California, until the police chief Parker came along in the 50s and didn't like races mingling, and put the kibosh on that by taking everybody's licenses away. It is, and everything that's happened with female reproductive rights on a daily basis, the onslaught. Jazz is the opposite of that. It's like, Ma Rainey and Bessie Smith were bisexual, if not lesbians. They were out, and now people are, being sent back into the shadows, and we're having to fight for things that, my mother was on the picket lines for a long time ago. So I think jazz is not my area of expertise. I'm a storyteller. I'm about the human spirit and stories. But for me, jazz represents this striving to make connection and magic and art, this continually evolving art form that is the triumph of adversity over, triumph over adversity. And may that continue to be a dominant voice in the struggles, because the struggles don't seem to be going away. And I find it shocking. I did an entire show of Langston Hughes in, with a jazz trio. And it was so present. Like, it was so clear when Trump was running for office way back when, that this is like, how can this be? Like, Langston's been writing about this since the teens, right? And here it is in our face. And then we did the show again for like 1,200 people for free for Black History Month. And people were just like, just like, thank you for putting this out there. It's the writers, it's the artists who are always at the front lines of fighting oppression. And we need them to be fighting oppression 100 years from now, I'm pretty sure, because I don't see it going in the opposite direction anytime soon.
Well, that leads me nicely into the last question that I wanted to ask, and I'd like each of you to respond, and I'll let you start, Jonathan. But in her essay, How It Feels to Be Colored Me, Zora Neale Hurston compared her visceral response listening to jazz to the more benign reaction that her white friend who had joined her had to the same music. And she wrote, I want to slaughter something, give pain, give death to what I do not know. But the piece ends. The men of the orchestra wipe their lips and rest their fingers. I creep back slowly to the veneer we call civilization with the last tone and find the white friend sitting motionless in his seat, smoking calmly. How does your individual work on this show bridge the gap between those two responses she depicted in that essay?
Well, I'm primarily a musician and a music lover. So if the music moves me and it's interesting and compelling, I don't care what kind of music it is. I don't care who's doing it. If it's done that, and if I've made myself open to it, then what's the problem?
Star?
Well, that could be a very long answer for me. I remember when I was first starting, I was touring with George Howard, who is a jazz pop saxophonist, and we were opening for Whitney Houston, touring around the country on her first tour. And I was the only girl in the band and the only Caucasian. And I remember traveling through the South with them, and we were driving through an area where it was obviously some sharecroppers cabins along with some mansions. I didn't even know. I mean, this is in the late 80s. I didn't know. This is my first tour. I didn't know what they were talking about or why they were getting so mad or why they were so upset. And then, I feel like it was such an education for them to share with me their feelings. And so what you're saying about the document that you read, I can understand how one person can feel a certain way and one person can feel another way from the same thing. A lot of it has to do with education and communication. For instance, the fact that they would share with me their feelings educated me. So then I felt the pain that they were feeling because they were my friends and they were my buddies and I was playing with them, So I think that just highlights more reason for people to hear stories, to hear music, to talk with each other, to get off their phones, to get out of there, and just if somebody feels a certain way, to speak their mind and to share with their friend, hoping that they will be accepted. And if that friend doesn't respond, I mean, what you're talking about is very crass, somebody just being negligent of something, you know, and having a bunch of privilege. But as a musician, is what Jonathan was talking about, you know, we play music which doesn't have a color, you know, and I mean, there's a lot of European influence in jazz. If you take apart a Bach convention and you just play the chords, you are hearing 2-5-1, 2-5-1. You're hearing all kinds of, which is a chord progression. You're hearing all kinds of jazz chords, and it's like, what, you know? So there's so many influences, and I think that you can't discount any of them. And it's just a communication that's just so important, and that's why I think music is so important in our society right now.
And I'm so glad you brought that up, Craig, because I use that in the piece. And the tagline is the white guy goes, "Good music they have here." You know, she's had this entire history of the African-American experience coursing through her veins. And I use that because there will be aha moments for people who go, precisely what Star experienced in real life as a young woman. It's like, yeah, good music they have here. It's like, well, it is good. It is good music they have there. But I feel that my job is to really have people experience on a visceral level the history of these extraordinary men and women who made this magic through all the challenges, and with, you know, and it is life affirming music, but it is wrought with blood and pain, and that in itself, to get some white people to stop and think about that, maybe, you know, in a different way, like just because this historical context is woven through the entire piece, and then the music tricks you into getting with the program a little.